Here it is, folks. We're making this delicious looking dish. Wait till you try it. Hello, welcome back to Texas Cooking Today. Today I'm going to be making one of the recipes that I have not done since my season 1, and that was my original ranch beans recipe. This recipe is delicious. It has all the right ingredients, it has all the right flavors, and it flat pops. I'm going to say this, if you've never been to Texas, but someday you plan to maybe getting around in that area, you have to try the ranch beans. These things go by a lot of different names. Ranch beans, ranchero beans, which is ranch beans, okay. Charro beans, which means cowboy beans. It's the same recipe, folks. And sometimes people will have minor variations between them. I do, but very minor. Okay, so this recipe, the original recipe that I do, flat delicious. It's got a lot of good ingredients, a lot of nutrition, a lot of flavor, and it's really not that hard to make when you get right down to it. I'm going to teach you some techniques you've never heard of before. One about the salt. We're going to get into that. Beans require salt, but they require it in the right way. Okay, we'll just say that. What I'm going to show you is going to develop a fantastic tasting bean recipe for you, and you're going to remember it and hang on to it. And I would like for you to come this way so we can look at this stuff, know what we're cooking with, and get started making this fantastic dish. Come over here. So the ingredients we have for our pinto beans. I have here some pinto beans that I've already been soaking. Now I'm going to show you a video in just a moment about how I got to this point right here, but that's in a moment. Right now we're talking about what we're using. I'm using pinto beans here. Pinto beans are flat delicious. The flavors pop from pinto beans, and ranch beans, this is the way they're made right here. Also, I have back here a ham bone, and this is from last week's video. This is from the ham recipe that I did, and so I'm just reusing part of that recipe for this recipe, and it's a great way to reuse that ham and that ham bone, let me tell you. I also have a little bit of lard. You don't have to use lard for this. You can use regular cooking oil, but I like the flavor of the lard. It meshes well with the ham bone I'm using, and it is very true to the origins of the dish. Also, I have some jalapeno, onion, garlic, cilantro, and to spice it up, we're going to be using cumin, paprika, and salt. The flavors on this, when this is done right, absolutely pop. And folks, we're getting into it right now. We just got to prep our veggies while we get started cooking the beans. I can take the beans and start cooking them now and prep the veggies on the side, okay? That's all it takes. I'm about to get ready prepping out my onion and jalapeno. But before I do this, I want to show you what I've done on my beans, okay? Let's discuss that for just a moment. These guys right here have already been through a process. Now that process involved, believe it or not, it involved a lot of salt. What I'm about to show you might seem a little bit shocking. Do not be afraid of this. This right here, these beans have been soaked in a brine solution overnight. They were soaked for about 9 hours almost in a solution of 6 cups of, 3 quarts of water, I'm sorry. 3 quarts of water, and I put in 1/4 of a cup of salt. And that was sea salt that I used. That was then stirred in well. I added the beans, soaked the beans overnight in that, and then this morning I drained that off, rinsed the beans out 2 times, and replaced this with a total of 6 cups of fresh water that are in there now. So I've got 6 cups of fresh water that I'm going to start heating up on the stove. And that way I have my beans and the water and everything all preheated by the time I get finished working on my jalapenos. But let me show you exactly what I did on these beans so you can see it firsthand. Let's take a look at those clips. Well, this is the night before. I have here a pot of water, and I have here 1/4 of a cup of salt. Yeah, believe it or not. this little technique is about what's called brining the beans, okay? Now, don't be afraid of this. It sounds a little bit scary at first, but let me explain what's going to happen here. We're going to use that salt to soften the skin of the bean. Now, it's kind of weird how this works. The skin filters the salt, so the salt doesn't actually get into the beans. However, the salt breaks down the skin and it tenderizes it so that it will boil much easier. When your beans cook, the centers will become much more soft and buttery, and they won't have like a mealy texture or anything like that to them. They'll be very, very tasty, and they'll be very good texture. Okay, so that's what we're looking for, is to improve the texture. When I was younger, I was taught wrong by certain experienced chefs that should have known better, but we have learned through experimentation that this technique works. And believe it or not, I learned this from America's Test Kitchen. You know, they constantly test stuff like this, and that's when we learned about this little technique. Now, when I'm boiling the beans, when I'm cooking it, I don't necessarily want a lot of salt in it, so I change the water and rinse the beans well so I get that salt off the outside, and then we will salt it appropriately to taste instead of leaving that salt in there, because this is a lot of salt. The idea here is to break down the skins. Now let's get this mixed in. Okay, let's get those beans down in that water. There we go. Now I've allowed that water to set for just a little bit, and there was some time in between that last clip and now. I wanted to put these in about an hour before I went to bed, so that way they're not, you know, soaking for more than, you know, a half a day. And that's going to be more than enough, okay? At that point, they're going to get cooked up in a very special way. So right now, it's just a matter of being patient. Well, as you can see, as I mentioned, this has been a process on the beans, and they are just fine. They're going to cook up beautifully. The skins are going to be very, very soft because of that salt. The inside of the bean is going to be wonderful, buttery and tender. This really works. I don't remember, because I slept since then. I don't remember if I mentioned last night that I actually got that tip from America's Test Kitchen, and of course, you know, I had to test it myself to make sure it was real, and when I did, I had the best beans ever. So I have now changed my recipe to incorporate that brining technique. Let's cut up our veggies. I put on gloves for one reason. I wanted to make it very clear, that when you're working with jalapenos, there's an oil in there that's just blazing hot. Now that might be the same reason that you're thinking, oh gee, I don't want to use jalapeno, that stuff's blazing hot. Well, if you don't process it right, you're correct. It will be hot. It'll make your dish hot. But we're going to process it right so that we don't have that heat. You see, the thing of it is, jalapenos, like most chilies, in fact like all chilies that I know of, have the heat contained within the core of the chili, in other words, that lighter colored part right there, and within the membrane that holds the seeds to the core, that holds the vast majority of the capsaicin. And if I just strip all of that right out of this jalapeno, then that dark green meat really isn't very hot. It doesn't contain much capsaicin at all. So once I've stripped out that core, I have a chili that is nice and tolerable, and I don't have to worry about the heat. Now, some people, they would just have a fit. I'll tell you what. In fact, I've had some of my viewers in the past that said, you've just ruined your chilies because you cut out the core. I like that part. And I want to say this, hey, if you like that part of the chili, then leave it in, use it. It's not a big deal. But for those who don't want it, that's the reason I teach this method, all right? So if you would just go ahead and do all of yours the same way, we're going to fine dice these. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. Now, if you'll see what I'm doing here, I'm making dice that are about 1/4 of an inch square at the biggest, all right? Now, if you want to know more about doing these jalapenos or cutting onion, I have a video, one for jalapeno, one for onion, that shows exactly how to do this easy and quick and not have a problem with it. So check those videos out. I'm going to get on cutting this thing up so we can move on with eating our beans. Okay, that's all there was to that. These are all cored and diced up and ready to go in the food. Now, I want to mention one thing. You saw me wearing some blue gloves. Well, actually, those were purple. But I want to mention, wear gloves when dealing with chilies. If you are new to cooking, especially, wear gloves, because that capsaicin does not wash off easily. Even with detergent, it's hard to remove. Hours later, you scratch under your eye or in some other sensitive location. Next thing you know, it's burning. Okay, well, that's that capsaicin that's hard to get off. If you wear gloves, you simply remove the gloves, you've removed the capsaicin, and you move right on in life, okay? Go ahead and do that. Now our onion, let's get it cut up. I've gone ahead and removed the stem end on my onion. I always leave the root end intact. I like to do that because it just holds it together while you're trying to cut things. All right, now if you've never seen me dice an onion, please watch my how to dice an onion video. I did it last season, and it will show you very easily and quickly what I'm about to do right here, because it doesn't take long to do this and to make it look really, really good, okay? So I think what is really neat about this method of cutting up an onion, as you've seen, A, it goes really super fast, and B, you get pieces that are all even and uniform. I got one back here, it's a little bit long, but that's easy to correct, right? Okay, so there we have it. Good even cut on that, very fast to do. Check out that video, my onion cutting video. You'll see how I do that. It is fun, easy, and definitely rewarding. Okay, now let's move on to the next part. We got to get this thing started up, right? All right, let's get some fire underneath that pan. Now I chose a center burner because it has a tendency to get incredibly hot. Okay, what I'm showing you here is just how I test my pans to make sure they are sufficiently hot. You see what's happening there? That water's just dancing around in it, skating around. What's happening there is you have the Leidenfrost effect happening, and that's where water dances around on its own vapor barrier. All right, so really cool. That tells us the pan is at the right temperature. I'm going to go ahead and get my fat in here, let that melt out. As soon as it does, I want to go ahead and get the onion in here. Now, while you don't have to use lard in this, I find that it really lends to the flavor of the overall dish, adds a very genuine quality to it, and tastes very much like what you're going to find in the Mexican food restaurants in Texas, as well as in a lot of the barbecue restaurants. My temperature, I want to lower it down to about a medium low for this part of it, because while I'm looking to get some good cooking on this, I don't necessarily want heavy browning. I'm not trying to get dark browning. Light browning is okay. All right, let's looky here. You see how I'm getting little bits of brown edges here and there, just starting. The onion is starting to get just a little bit light in color. In other words, it's not quite as white as it was. It's a little more translucent. Let's put in the jalapeno. That onion's been cooking for, maybe 5 minutes. Our next step, I need to get this in here. But let's take a look what we have. Look at this. Our onions have become much more translucent. They're much softer, they're more cooked down, exactly what we're looking for. You don't see any pooling of lard in the bottom. Okay, there's none of that, and there's slight browning going on all the way across. Every bit of that is flavor, all of it. Okay, so now I just got to get this down into the beans and boil them up there. is. Isn't that nice? All right, let's start with the garlic. I've already removed the husk, and right now I am just taking off that little scab end. Not such a major thing, but I just don't like seeing it in my food, if you know what I mean. The real truth of the matter is, though, the garlic is going to pretty much cook down to the point you don't even notice it in there. All we have to do is crush each of these cloves, just like so. Nothing more. Throw them right in the pot. That's it. Garlic is done. Now we're not going to be putting in our cilantro at this time. That needs to go in towards the end of the cook. Cilantro is a bittering herb. You don't want it in there too long. If you put the right amount in there and put it in there for the right amount of time, it is wonderful. I'm going to put just a small amount of salt in here, about a half of a teaspoon, no more. And on my cumin and paprika, well, that's simple enough. About 1 tablespoon right there of cumin. Right here, my paprika, I'm doing about the same thing. About 1 tablespoon of paprika. I'm going to say this, keep your cumin no more than 1 tablespoon. The paprika, however, if you wish to double up on that, you can do it. It will not hurt a thing. It'll add a lot to the complexity and flavor of the dish. It'll be much more like the ranch beans that you get in the can. Now I have a second ranch beans recipe that's very similar to what you get in the can, and it was meant to mimic that. But this is my first one, and it's meant to mimic what you get in a lot of Texas restaurants, and it is good. Next thing, I have this beautiful ham bone. We need to get our ham bone in there, right? Careful, let it slide in, don't slosh. We don't want burns. So at this point, it's a matter of getting this to come back up to a boil. As soon as it does that, I'm going to lower my burner to its lowest setting, cover it, and I'm going to let it simmer. We're going to simmer this for about an hour to start with. We're going to test our beans to see if they are as done as we want, and if they need more cooking, then we move on from there. Well, looky there. We got our high boil that I'm looking for. I'm going to cover this, lower my burner to a low simmer right there. I leave it alone, okay? Now I'm going to set a timer, 1 hour, boom. Timer's up and running. I'm going to give that 1 hour to cook. I'm going to come back. We're going to check those beans and see what the tenderness is like and how much salt I might need to add. So the quantity of everything that we have used today, it starts with the beans. I began with 1 pound of pinto beans. Look how much that makes. It's a huge batch of beans. We added to that 4 jalapenos that have been cored and fine diced, 3 cloves of garlic that were simply crushed, the onion, that's 1 medium onion, dice that out and you're ready to go. As far as how much of that cilantro, we used a half a cup of chopped cilantro. And the cumin, 1 tablespoon of cumin, 1 tablespoon of paprika, salt to taste, but basically you're talking about a teaspoon of salt. And then on our lard, I used about 1/4 cup of lard. And then on the ham, just enough there to give it some good flavor. I used a ham bone. If you got a little meat on it, it's that much better. So enjoy that. And a good substitute for that ham, if you want, you can use some like barbecue beef. Don't use too much of it. You don't want it too much of a smoky flavor, but that will work. There it is. Very good recipe, very delicious. Now let's take a look at the end product. I tested these beans just a few minutes ago for tenderness. And what you want to do is just very simply, take some beans, pull them out, put them in a small dish, and then after they've cooled for a moment, test them, taste them. Now, 2 things I noticed. Number 1, it needs a little bit of salt, okay? And if you remember, we kept it light on the salt. We did that on purpose. And here's the reason. Ham sometimes has a lot of salt in it. And well, even though I was cooking this ham in here, I didn't quite get as much salt release as I would have wanted. because this wasn't a very salty ham. Some hams are more salty than others. Okay, so here's the thing. After you have cooked your beans, check them, taste, see if they need a little extra salt. If they do, go ahead and add a little bit. I'm going to put in about a half a teaspoon just to start with. And I'm going to let that cook along with my cilantro. I'm just going to go ahead and chop up, and it doesn't have to be a pretty job. You don't have to do a fine chiffonade or anything, but just chop up some cilantro, and that way you get that cooked in. Now, the reason we did not cook in the cilantro the whole time, cilantro is a bittering herb, okay, and it will be rather pungent if you put it in early in the cooking. You add the cilantro later on. It is a wonderful addition, a great flavor, and definitely something that that kind of makes the dish, really. All right, this has had a few minutes to go ahead and cook down just a little bit more. That way that salt gets dispersed well. At the same time, we've got the cilantro, excuse me. Put that over there. I have that cilantro that's now cooked down into it. Oh, I'll tell you what I have here is a gorgeous batch of beans that are going to be so tasty. This is something I grew up with, actually, and most of the folks around here have. We grew up eating this exact same kind of food on pretty much just a regular basis. This was our everyday fare. So there we have it. Beautiful ranch style beans, just the way they should be. All right, here we go. I just love this moment. My favorite. Oh, guys, let me tell you, the spice is spot on. The flavors are there, but the beans, the skin is unnoticeable. The beans are so soft and buttery, you almost don't have to chew them. They're just there. Skins are still intact. They look beautiful. The whole dish is there, and it is so good. You're going to like this one. You're also going to like the way I write my recipes. Those are on my website. Please take a look at that. Take a look at S.A.Trotter.com. Also, I have Patreon. I have a Wissio account. There's a lot of other stuff, my Facebook and everything, that's all kind of centered around Texas cooking today, this right here. So please take a look at that. Links are right down below in the description box. I thank you very much for doing that. And folks, please enjoy those beans. They're really worth your time. They're definitely worth any trouble that you put out for them. Enjoy.